Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Cheaper Than Therapy. Okay, so Danae and I are super excited. Martha, we found you via your TEDx talk, which I'm assuming we're not the only people that have ever reached out in that way, right? You're in Australia, you're halfway across the world from us. Danae found this and was like, yo, you got to watch this. And I, like I said, before we got on, was immediately on my email, like, please talk to us. Let's make this happen. So we always start with all of our guests by really asking let's go back in history and kind of tell us a bit of the story of how you came to be who you are. I mean, I know you're not necessarily an expert in air quotes expert in the topic that your TEDx is on, and we'll get to that. But I want to know what is the meandering path, I suppose, that took you to standing up in front of all of those people and doing the thing?
Yeah. Great question. Who is this woman who is happy to... To be honest, it wasn't supposed to be so emotional. I grew up in Canada and,
nailed it, V. She guessed it.
Yeah.
I heard you and I was like, she's from Canada.
She sure is. As I say in the talk, I had a lovely childhood, and I was in a situation where, regardless of whatever challenges I had the parents who had the knowledge and the interest and the skills and the time to support me, right, to be successful. So I had an understanding that I was worthy of putting time into. And there were ways that I could be successful, and it's okay to kind of do things differently. But to be honest, I didn't really have that much trouble in school. Just with math, I still don't know my times tables. But yeah, nobody does. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I went to university, which, became easier because I was studying the thing that I liked. So, I did an English degree, which was easy for me because I'm good at bullshit. And all you have to do is make things make sense together. And with a brain like this, that, does divergent thinking and, thinks in kind of constellations, it's easy to go oh, how can I relate this literary text to this stupid movie, right? So you can find those paths. And then I went to teachers college and became a teacher. And then I moved to Australia and, did a bunch of things. But it was when I had kids that I was this is really hard. I feel like this is harder than it's supposed to be. And also we live Perth, Western Australia is the world's most isolated city. And we live 450 kilometers or I guess 300 miles, I don't know, south of Perth, Western Australia on the coast. Okay. So we're very far away from the whole wide world, including my mom, which that's an issue. But I was a teacher, and the school that I worked at was 45 minutes away. And my husband's the paramedic in the place that we live. So it's all kind of is he home tonight? Is he out tonight? It was just the worst possible combination for someone who struggles with executive function. Right. Mm-hmm. So I had gone back to work after having my second child. I don't have a body that went particularly well with having kids. So I had to have 5 surgeries after having kids. And so that was all difficult. And then, I had go to work and I'd teach the kids, and then you have to come home and make the food. And I was just what? It seems like other people are having an okay time with this, and I find it really hard. So I was just sort of I need to do something else. And that's when I started my copywriting business, Word Candy. Okay. And I was that must be the problem, is this distance, and I'm not doing something that I really, really want to be doing. So that did help. But then I was working from home, where when you're a teacher, you have 20 minutes to do this thing, and then you just do it. And it's very different, as you probably both know, when you're working from home, where it's I made up these deadlines. We all know that there's no real deadline. So I found that really hard. But it was right at the same time that COVID was starting to happen, and people were all kind of it's hard to work from home. And I was I guess everyone's having trouble working from home. So we kind of talk ourselves into or out of I mean, maybe this is just as hard for everybody. It's probably just like, I'm not trying hard enough or whatever. And I'd be like, I'm going to like read this productivity book and do all this shit and try to like fix the problem. And then I had a doctor's appointment, which was actually like with a friend who is also a doctor, because I also had like ongoing stomach problems. And he was just like, pew, like, and he was like, how do you go with focus and attention? And I was like, oh, not great. I'm kind of like a little bit worried about it, blah, blah, blah. He's like, what about grocery shopping? I was like, no, I can't do that. And he just had these really gentle questions. And it was like a situation where this was like a long consultation. This wasn't a 10-minute situation. It was a long consultation with a GP who knew what he was talking about and knew what ADHD in women looks like, and wasn't just like, it's just for little boys, right? And so then we had this long conversation, and he, at the end of it, I was like, do you think I have ADHD or something? And he was like, I mean, I can't diagnose you, but like, here are the next steps, sort of thing. So I was shocked, honestly, because I was like, I used to be a teacher. I know about ADHD, but I had no idea like the scope and like the depth and breadth of the ways it affects my life until I started doing research about it. And I was like, okay, this explains a lot about me.
Yeah, Martha, I feel like I want to go back a little bit. And if you would, for people that are listening, and, Vanessa has a lot more knowledge than I do about ADHD, but just for people who are listening who don't know what you might mean when you talk about executive function or like some of the things that were challenging that you're describing, can you give us some examples of some of the things you were experiencing?
Yeah. So ADHD, it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And the things that I'm about to tell you are like things that I have read in books by people who know what they're talking about. They aren't things that I've made up or things that I just think, but it's the thing that I've read that really resonates with me is that it's not that we have a deficit of attention. We have too much attention and less ability to regulate that attention. So that's one piece of it. And that's the piece that I think most people think of when they think of ADHD. Like that person can't pay attention or that person never stops moving, right? So the thing, and I take medication for ADHD. So the thing that does is it allows my brain to file the things that I don't need to pay attention to so that I can pay attention to the thing that I need to pay attention to, right? So there's that. And then there's executive function. And, there are between, 8 and 12, depending on who you read or who you talk to, different types of executive function. And those are like the way our brain organizes things to get things done. So it's stuff like task initiation, task completion, prioritization, really kind of knowing where to start, what to do next, and then what to do after. But also emotional regulation is an executive function, right? So that is also like an issue for me. And I'm not like a yelling, screaming mess, but like I know that I get dysregulated. I have a disproportionate response to lots of things. And so I'm working on that. But that is a really key one. And so I think like for, parents particularly, like I have 2 kids with ADHD and I'm trying to teach them how to regulate their emotions when I'm dysregulated, right? So it just, and we trigger each other and it's just like a bit of a shit sandwich sometimes. But yeah, so the sorts of things like, we're having guests down and we need to do all these things before they arrive. But like, if I don't know what time they're arriving, I can't and I'm just like, I know I have to do all these things, but I don't know what to do first. I don't know what to do second. And then it goes into, there's a lot of shame associated with ADHD because you have these like, quote unquote failures. And I call them failures. And my husband gets like really stern. They're not failures. I'm like, well, they feel like failures, right? So you have these failures over the day and over the week and over the month and over the years. And so then when your guests are arriving, but you don't know what time, so you're paralyzed and can't do anything, you're like, of course I'm doing this because I'm a fucking loser. Like it just is just like, this is what happens to me. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do that. And then it just kind of, feeds into that like real shame about like, that there are things that you can't do that seem really easy for other people. You also know that you're like very smart as well and like capable in other ways. So it's just really confusing. So that's just like a brief I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really helpful. I think one of the things that as a therapist, as a mother, I think one of the things that I've struggled with as I have recently in the last year or so gone down my own rabbit hole around ADHD and realizing that I for sure check many, many, many of the boxes. And Danae and I talk about this a lot, right? You use the term like array of traits in your talk. Like there's so many traits and you're not going to check all of the boxes of all of the traits, right? And so I think the struggle is, and Danae and I, we both come from a depth psychological background, which I think for depth psychologists, it's a little bit different in that we tend to be a little bit slower to want to diagnose because a lot of times we'll look at things like depression, anxiety, ADHD, right? What do you think about this concept? Like there's so many traits, right? I guess where I'm getting to, or I don't even know if there's a question in this or if it's more of just like something I've been thinking about is like, I just feel like if we looked at the array of traits, we've all got it. It's like, it feels like every one of us checks some of these boxes, right? And so where is the line between like, we're all just dealing with this and, oh no, I'm actually diagnosable ADHD,
Okay. The reason why I'm doing this is because there's something I want to remember to say. The thing I think that my GP said to me that really made me go like, oh, was, because and he's talking about me, because you are like a high achieving person, you have come up with ways to work around the difficulties that you have. And like everybody does that. Everybody has difficulties and they come up with ways around them. Right. But he said, but when like those things fall apart, it becomes really distressing. And he's like, and when it's distressing, there's so many things we can do to help. Right. So there are traits that are linked to ADHD. And as you know, there are also like diagnostic criteria. Right. So they gave me the test and, it was something like you got 5 out of 6 on part A and 10 out of 12 on part B, and you missed one question altogether. And I was like, how dare you? Like, how very dare you? But so that to me was like, okay, right? Like that's pretty definitive. There's another sort of thing that is like on the tips of people's tongues, I guess, is this other diagnosis of VAST, which is like variable attention, something, something, something. And, that kind of goes along with like, like we're all distractible. We're all kind of more distractible than maybe we used to be because of like advertising and phones and our attention spans and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I think with ADHD, at least in the way I understand it, is like, to me, it was like, I have these, executive function difficulties, which are more numerous and more severe in people with ADHD. And also there's like a link of like, oh, and that says something about me as a person, right? So it's that thing of like, I describe it like, as I work from home, and before I kind of knew I had ADHD and started getting treatment for ADHD, I'd like try to do try to do it right. Like I'd write down the 3 things that I needed to achieve that day. And I would like light the candle and whatever, like just desperate to try and just be able to get things done. And there were things that I could do and things that I was entirely, able to do and wanted to do. And I would just get distracted and I wouldn't get those things done, but I would get 100 other things done, but you still feel like a bad person because you didn't get those things done. Right. And so those little micro quote unquote failures, I called them at the time, kind of are like death by 1,000 cuts. So like you either get to the end of the day and you feel like the worst person in the world because you just had these 3 jobs. And even though you did 70 other jobs, you didn't do that one. So like you have less in your like bowl of resilience to deal with the other executive function challenges that come with like when your kids come home and like they haven't eaten their whole lunch. And so they're like having a meltdown, and then you have to make dinner and you have to do da-da-da. And like, you're interrupted. And I had less in my bowl of resilience to deal with those things. And like, it was distressing. Mm-hmm. So then they were like, okay, we can do something about it. So it's like, yeah, we can all relate to these traits. And I'm going off a little bit here, but I think the most difficult thing that I encounter, because people talk to me about ADHD a lot, and they all want to be like, oh, like I lose my keys. Like we all lose our keys. And I'm like, I'm not fucking talking about losing my keys, Janet. Like I'm talking about, this existential crisis of like, I am trying so hard. And these little, these things keep happening, right? So it's an array of traits. There's also a diagnostic criteria, as you know. And so it's quite dismissive when people are like, yeah, I forget things too. Like we're all the same. And I'm like, no, we're not. Yeah. But the other thing I want to say is, I really believe that like telling yourself you don't have ADHD is also an ADHD trait. Like it's literally just like, oh, like I'm not that bad at it. Like it's probably just, I just need to try harder. Like that's what it is, right? Like I should be able to do this. And since I should be able to do it, the fact that I can't is like upsetting. And so my best friend and I both have it. And like, we will do the most ADHD shit ever. And I'll text her and I'm like, oh my God, this just happened. And she's like, you probably don't even have it. And I'm like, I know, I just need to try harder.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. And I think the fact that you talked about the shame feels like a really important aspect to me, Martha, because there's a lot of what you're saying that I'm so struck by. And, as Vanessa mentioned, we're depth psychologists. So there's a lot of like, whatever the experiences that someone's having. And I do think Gabor Mate does have ADHD, and he talks about it in terms of like, which comes first, chicken or egg, and like in terms of like the myth of normal and like the trauma response to a society that puts such an exorbitant amount of pressure on us as people, but certainly as women, right? Like you talked about bringing your babies home and saying this is harder than it's supposed to be. What I guess I'm alluding to is, while I think the diagnoses that we're talking about, ADHD in this case, are absolutely real. And I think what you just said is really important. I also think there's a lot of ways that whatever the mental health struggle is a lot of times us, from a psyche perspective, being asked to tune into something that is wrong. Like, James Hillman said, depression is psyche's way of saying, I refuse to participate in mania. I will not participate in a society moving at this pace. And so it's like that mental health struggle is sort of asking us to slow down and get real about what we're not looking at societally. And I think there's some of that about what you're describing with the experience of ADHD, and that there may be some things that we are being asked to tune into, and Vanessa sort of brought up that there's something happening with like how more often. That is not a sentence today.
How much more often?
How much more often? Thank you, Martha.
No problem.
How much more often women post having children are being diagnosed. And I guess I don't know if there's a question in there, but I think it's an interesting thing to be curious about.
I have two things to say, and I'm going to definitely forget one of them. So I want to say something about what you said about systems and being asked to tune into something that's wrong. And then can you remind me to go back to the second thing that you just said, which I've also already forgotten? That'd be great. So I think the difficulty is that, okay, I agree, there is something wrong, right? We live in a capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy, and everybody is trying to work in a system that was created by and for a group that is like not the majority group. And that is challenging and traumatic and exhausting and impossible. So that's one thing. I also think it isn't always productive to say, well, this system is wrong, and the only thing that will fix it is to burn it down, which we all know to be true. And because of that, you have to suffer, because realistically, we do live in this system. So yes, it is unfair that there are all these, neurotypical and, all the other systemic expectations placed on us, and we are not all the same. And also, I believe that it is fine for people to kind of go, this is a diagnosis that, is true for me, that I resonate with, that I am making changes in the sphere in which I have control to try and, calm down and slow down and all that stuff. But the reality is, I live in this system, and I want it to be less painful, while at the same time working to burn the whole thing down, right? So if we're going to burn the whole thing down, we need to be well rested. If we're going to burn the whole thing down, we have to constantly not be in a shame spiral. If we're going to burn the whole thing down, we have to understand that, we only have so many spoons, and we have to understand how to conserve our energy. So I really do acknowledge that there is something wrong. I also, as you have said as well, I also acknowledge these are real diagnoses, and I also acknowledge they're based on unrealistic expectations. So, there's a lot of people who want to be like, well, it's just because we medicalize everything. And so, if only we all lived in a valley and, all we had to do was make flower crowns all day, none of us would have ADHD. And it's yeah, if only, but that is not the case. So, I think, I don't know. What do you think, Danae?
I think that was really well said. I don't know, Danae, what's your thought?
I love that response. And I think that absolutely, both things can be true at the same time. I think what I was sort of having the curiosity around was the way that you were speaking to the shame of it. And I think, yes, I can do things that make me feel like I am able to thrive in my life in a way that feels better for me. And for me, it's a lot of times there's a diagnosis of dysthemia that is
what's that?
Within it's it's a low level depression that basically I think 99% of African Americans are have dysthemia because it is depressing to live in a white supremacist society, right? And it's okay, so this is the diagnosis, and I can make myself wrong or shameful for having this diagnosis, or I can say both things are true. I need support for what I'm struggling with in terms of my mental health. And there's a lot about this effed up society that makes this not a me, there's something wrong with me thing, but there's something wrong with the world around me thing. Do you know what I mean? And I love the way
Totally. And it's that thing of is the way we frame a diagnosis, if we're going to think of something as being inherently negative, which I know you're not suggesting, then it will feel negative. But for me, I was oh my God, it was empowering to go there's a reason why this stuff is so hard. And this is kind of going back a little bit, but when I was a kid, I lied a lot. As a kid and as a young adult, I lied a lot. I didn't know why. I lied about things I didn't need to lie about, that whole thing. And as an adult, I have always kind of been I don't understand why I did that. And I was I want to try and understand why I did that, because I don't want my kids to feel like they have to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And then I found out that I had ADHD, and I read ADHD 2.0, and lying as a kid is a part of impulsivity, and it's magical thinking. I wish this thing were true. And so I just act as though it is. And I was oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And then, so when my child who has ADHD, quote unquote, lies, I can kind of go they'll lie or say something that's not true. And then they'll say it was an accident. And I'm, initially I'm it's not an accident. You said it. But what they mean is, I didn't mean to. Like, I didn't mean to say that. And then I said it, and then it was said, and then you have to stick to it until you die, right? So that understanding of like lying in kids with ADHD can be impulsivity. And it just made me feel like more compassionate towards myself rather than being like, what is wrong with me? I was like, oh, I know what's wrong with me. It's this. So I just found it personally validating, because it's not all in your head, and it's not just you're not trying hard enough. It's like, this is really extra hard for you. And I found that very helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to that, Martha, because I think, there are ways that, as Vanessa said, within depth psychology, we are slow to pathologize, and absolutely grateful that we have a DSM and we have a way to diagnose things that are going on. But I think that's the flip side of what a diagnosis can offer that I feel like maybe we don't speak to enough, that there can be a deep exhale and like understanding myself in a way that I haven't.
Yeah. And it honestly, like when because I had the appointment with the GP in a Zoom, and I came back out into the kitchen, and my husband, David, was there. And I was like, John thinks I have ADHD. And David was like, and then he kind of like, we looked around the kitchen, and like every vegetable and plate and dish that I had used to make my lunch 2.5 hours before was all still there. And because I just forget, things disappear, right? They disappear from my brain when I'm not in the same room as them. And David was like, that kind of makes sense, right? And so I was like, oh my God, like I actually felt seen. And I didn't think, oh, this is a bad thing. I was just like, oh my God, thank Beyonce, there's a reason, right? And now I can make a path to try and like improve some of these things that I'm feeling.
Yeah, I think that the way that we're talking about this in like the yes and is really important, because I think exactly how you said it earlier. It's like, yes, the system is fucked and we all need to actively participate in dismantling the system. And also in the meantime, I would like to not be as feeling crazy as I do, right? And I, in particular, like I personally resonated so much, and I feel like I'm like laughing at what you're saying so often, not because I'm laughing at you, but more I'm laughing at myself, because I find so much comparison. And it wasn't, again, until I had a child that I was like, I am losing my ever-loving mind and I don't understand what's going on. And yes, motherhood is ridiculous in our society and it should not be this hard. And also, I know that I can be a better mother than this, and it's not working. Like all of my tools are not working. I keep trying, and I keep changing it, and I keep trying to pivot, and it's nothing is working. And I feel like a failure, and I feel like a piece of shit. And that's not okay. Right. I don't want to feel that way, because I know that I'm not, but I continue to feel that way. And I think so many mothers have come to me expressing very similar things. One of the things I'm actually currently writing a book myself right now. And I have found recent research, and I have to dive into it more, so I can't like speak as an expert on this, but they're doing research now where there's like this Venn diagram, right? Of like ADHD, particularly in women, ADHD spectrum, autism spectrum disorder, and quote unquote gifted, right? And where kind of those traits and what would filter into those three kind of areas in the Venn diagram, how there's overlap there too. And I have the research hole that I've got into has just absolutely blown me open into a place of self-acceptance. And I haven't even been formally diagnosed yet, but I know for a fucking fact that I would be, should I go. And I just want to say thank you. Like, thank you for speaking to it in that way, because even as somebody like myself who does come from a depth psychology background and does so often strive to hold these things in the way that I expressed, right? Which is like, they're here to serve some purpose. Like they're here to tell us something about our environment. There is still a lot of exhale that comes from, and also by understanding it in this way, it feels really fucking good, and it can be helpful to me and to my family.
Because it is completely impossible to go, I'm living in this society that is designed to make, me and lots of people feel shitty, and there's nothing I can do about it. right? Like you can't change the society by yourself today, right now. All you can do is change, the way you understand why it's challenging for you. And then the things you decide to do to kind of change your environment so that it is more, like restorative or whatever you need for you. And like I have since the beginning of the year, I've changed the way that I work. So I'm a copywriter, and I used to have a lot of projects kind of on at the same time, these long projects. And, when things go on and on, like Vanessa, I think you'll feel this, but like, if you're doing something and you get like the hard bit done, can it be quite hard to finish the rest of it? Yeah. So
Unless
so
it's like, oh, it's
I
due
get
in
the
an
whole
hour,
copy.
and then suddenly I'm like,
Yes. Yeah.
and I can get it all done in an hour.
Yeah. Oh my God. Welcome. You have ADHD. But it's like, that was really difficult for me. So I created this service called Hyperfocus Weeks, where like we do the whole thing in 1 week. And it's like, it's better for the client, whatever, but it's better for me because I'm like, this project starts on a Tuesday and finishes on a Tuesday. So if I hate this topic, which I don't hate any of my clients, obviously, or if I'm not particularly interested or whatever, the dopamine is there because of the deadline. And I always get it done. Like even a couple of weeks ago, it was my birthday and I needed to take Friday off and my kids were homesick on Tuesday. So instead of like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which I would normally work on a project, I had Wednesday, Thursday, and I got it done because that is the amount of time I had. Right. So I've changed the entire way I work to be good for the customers, but really to work for me. And I feel so much less stressed because like ADHD burnout is real. Like any burnout is real, but ADHD burnout is a real thing and it can take weeks to get out of. So my whole thing is let's not be burnt out.
Yes. And I want to jump on that because for years leading up to probably about a year ago, I used to always talk about this in terms of internally versus externally motivated. And I would talk to clients about this a lot.
About you.
Yeah. And so I always looked at myself as, okay, maybe I am an externally motivated person because I did kind of grow up in the corporate sphere. I did a really, I was in advertising for 10 years in New York City doing the grind, yada, yada. And so I kind of like learned how to work in deadlines and stress and all the things. And now that I'm working for myself and it's very different, I'm really struggling. And so there was many conversations I had with clients around that. Right. And so for example, even like working out. And for those listening, I'm going to give you like some of the little tips that we learn in order to function in our society. Right. So with working out, I want to go work out every day. I love working. I love moving my body, but I would have a really hard time getting there. Not for lack of desire, but for lack of my day got away from me. I've got a lot of shit to do that I should have done 2 hours ago. And I didn't for whatever reason. Right. So what I did was way back in the day.
Can I also say there's also too many steps?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So to work out, I don't know where you work out, but it's like, get changed, get out of the house, get to the gym, find my card, have my keys, all of those things like that is like cognitive load. So the number of steps also. So if you're like, I'm just not going to go, you're like, oh, I've just like removed 11 steps. And then it's like,
well, so
but then you feel bad. Sorry.
I signed up for ClassPass. And here's why I signed up for ClassPass. I don't know if you guys have that in Australia or not, but basically what it does is if you don't cancel minimum 12 hours before, your ass gets charged $25, whether you go or not. And guess what was a really good motivator for me to go? Losing $25 for no other reason than not getting my ass there. And so I started being able to say, okay, let me put these quote unquote external motivating forces onto myself in these areas so that I know I will get it done. So that was just an example of working out, but I do that with making up deadlines too, like with Instagram and social media. I will put something online and say, hey, this is going to be live in 2 weeks, even though I haven't started.
Yeah.
Because if I do that,
Absolutely.
I've got accountability and it forces me to do it, right?
Mhm.
But this is the only way that I can get things done. And I always thought it was because I was lazy, unmotivated. I don't have any internal or intrinsic motivation, right? And the more I've done this research, the more I'm realizing, oh no, this is just my strategies because that part of my brain has a really hard time with that motivation.
Because you have an interest-based nervous system, right? That's another thing like associated with ADHD. So you do want to go to the gym, but like the consequence is, okay, I lose $25 and I'm really interested in not losing $25, right? Yeah. So we do that. And the social media thing is like, I want to do it. I do want to do it. But like the thing that your brain knows to be more important at that time just takes precedence, right? So you are forcing the deadline so that you become interested. And like, that is kind of what has worked for me with this hyper-focused service. But because the way that I used to do it is I would have like a 2-week block and I'm like, I want to get these things done in the 2 weeks. And then if I didn't get those things, 2 of those things done or whatever, I would feel awful about myself. And I've got this amazing friend, mentor, co-working buddy, she's amazing. And she said to me, your brain knows what's important. And your brain knows what's important because you know that things are never late. You know that you always get the things done. So she's like, trust your brain. And it's like, so instead of going, I'm lazy, I'm unmotivated, I don't care, I can't, I started going, well, I trust my brain. And my brain actually knows the real deadline. And my brain knows that we need to do this thing. And that was a real shift for me because all of those lazy, unmotivated, blah, 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 like those are all the words that people kind of throw at people who have ADHD. And like, if you're like me and like you, being called lazy and unmotivated is like unthinkable because you're the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're doing all the things. So that's why you internalize, like, if I were trying harder, I could do it. I need to try harder. And that's just an impossible situation to be in. So it's just like giving yourself some grace, like some self-compassion. And for me, having a diagnosis and an understanding of like my brain has led to a little bit more self-compassion. I'm still very hard on myself, but like we're working on it.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I'm like, when you're like sitting listening to something a little bit dumbstruck, and I think I am because Martha, like Vanessa's my best friend, and there's a lot of ways that I have experienced her in the world and the ways that we process things a little bit differently that are making a lot of sense as you're describing it. And sometimes I will feel like you just don't really want to do this, or like this isn't your jam, or you're not interested in it. And just tell me if that's how you feel. And it's like, I'm understanding it's like, not that she doesn't have the desire to be in this thing with me. It's the way that I'm processing the process is maybe a little bit different than the way I'm processing the process. So
I actually feel like I'm going to cry right now.
The other thing I think is like and this isn't like anything, the thing that you just said, Danae, is absolutely valid. But when you might say, I feel like you don't want to do this, that would be devastating for Vanessa because she's like, I don't want Danae to think I don't want to do this. I love Danae so much. I love our podcast. I love everything we do together. I need to be better so she doesn't think that I don't want to do it. And so it's because there's like this rejection sensitive dysphoria as well, where, feeling misunderstood, feeling like, your friend, and I'll just like full disclosure, last year had a very significant friend breakup with a friend who was like my best friend for 15 years. And as I become unmasked, she has been very uncomfortable with it and just couldn't handle it. And she doesn't want to be my friend anymore. Right. So I think from Vanessa's perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa, but that thing of like, I need Danae to know that this is so important to me and I'm trying really hard. And like that, acknowledgement from you, Danae, of like, okay, it's not that she doesn't want to do it. We just have these very different brains, right? Does that sound spot on, Vanessa?
I'm thinking how often I'll say things like, and not just to you, Janae, but to like John or whoever's listening, where I'm like, there's so often where like, I want to do all these things and I'm doing all these things. And then I'm like, I just want to go lay in a bed of fucking wildflowers and do none of the things. Everybody leave me alone. Nobody talk to me. Leave me the fuck alone. And I've never understood like why I do this like wild swing back and forth and back and forth.
Yes.
Even relationally, you know, I love you. I want to be with you. I want to be around you. Oh my God, don't talk to me. Don't touch me. You're too much. I hate you. Like, this is how my poor partner, you know, it's like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And I think so much of this is, it's hard for people to, of course, it's hard to understand that, right? If that is just not the way that your brain processes things. And you're going to take it personally, and then I'm going to take it personally. And then this is where we have so many of these, you know, fallouts.
Well, and if Danae thinks I don't want to do this, she's going to leave and not want to do this. Right. Is where I go to.
Well, it's a lot of abandonment, right? I think there is a huge fear of that. And I mean, I think we can talk about that obviously in a lot of other ways too. I mean, you've got attachment, you've got this, you've got that. But I think what I'm starting to understand and having this conversation is like really kind of opening my eyes is that actually the neurodivergency, the way the brain actually works, there is a hypersensitivity to abandonment. There's a hypersensitivity to rejection that actually isn't the same level of sensitivity to that people without you know, people who are more, oh my God, my brain. Neurotypical. Thank you. Don't experience it in the same way, I guess.
Yeah. And it's, you know, a good friend of mine, when I said I have ADHD, she's like, you know, one of these friends who's just like, okay. And she's like, well, I want to know about this. What do I do? And I was like, get this book, ADHD 2.0, read it. And she did. And like that, it was just like the most affirming thing for me, because like, then when I'm doing my ADHD thing, she's like, oh yeah, there it is. So that book, ADHD 2.0, is amazing. There's also another book called Your Brain's Not Broken by Dr. Tamara Rossier, which is so good. And I've kind of like, you know, I sent ADHD 2.0 to like my parents, and like I got my husband to read it, and because it just like, I think I spend a lot of time now that I do like a little bit of this advocacy work trying to explain it, which is I'm happy to do generally, but it's exhausting. So to have the people closest to you to not have to explain it is really helpful, right? So that action, that my friend took was like really helpful. And part of the, you know, the reason that other friendship, I think, didn't, you know, fell apart was I was trying to be seen by her. I wanted her to understand I feel like a completely different person since I have been diagnosed with ADHD. I understand myself more. I understand, you know, the ways that I was masking in like social situations. I understand like a lot of that stuff. And I was trying to get my friend to see me, not even so that like to excuse like what she perceived as bad behavior, but so that my close friend could understand what I now know about myself. And, you know, now maybe I'm like, oh, maybe I was trying to tell her too much or whatever it was. But just being seen by people, even if there's sometimes like, I don't, you know, it was a bit frustrating how this happens, but like, I get it. It's not because you don't want to do it. It's because like, this is hard for you. Makes such a big difference, and allows like, I think, us to be more compassionate with ourselves too.
I mean, I'll be honest. I feel like I feel emotional. I feel really grateful because I feel like there are a lot of times that, you know, I haven't understood. And I think you are, I'm sure, going to help so many people be supportive of people in their lives in ways that they maybe haven't been because they haven't understood. And I, you know, I feel like I owe you an apology, babe, because I know for sure there are times that I haven't. I'm getting emotional because I know there are times that I haven't been super supportive of, like, I see it sometimes as like perfectionism, or like there's just like the pressure, and I'm like, oh my God, settle down. Like, I feel like I've been
It's
dismissive at
fine.
times.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for that, because I don't think I understood. And I think there are a lot of ways that, like, you've held, I'm like, I am gonna cry.
The crying episode.
You've held so
I'm
much
good, guys.
space
I'm good. I did all my crying during my TED talk. Sorry, Danae, keep going.
No, but it's like that thing of like, V carries a lot and makes it look like it's not heavy. And I feel like I'm really tapping into what that has been like for you, and it's making me feel a lot of grief and just like sadness that I didn't understand. So I'm really grateful that you came on, Martha, if for no other reason than to help me understand my friend a little bit more.
Well, actually, what you're saying is feels like a little bit healing for me also, even though my friend has not said any of those words. But like, that's what I would have loved to have heard from my friend, right? Like, you've just acknowledged a thing, and it's not like, you know this, but it's about learning the correct way and then trying to do the correct way as much as you can. Right? It's not about being perfect. It's not about any of us being perfect, but it's about learning new information and then adjusting the way we think or behave, which, I think is applicable to so many different parts of our lives, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, now I know partly why the universe sent you to us, honestly.
We did not expect this to be such an emotional episode.
You're like, yes, my work.
I bring it out in people, ladies. Okay, but Vanessa, I have a couple of questions for you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because like you said something a minute ago that I think was really like universal, right? Where you're like, I want to do all these things, and then sometimes I want to just like lie in a thing of flowers and like not talk to anybody. So, the thing that I told myself before I was diagnosed with ADHD is I am an extrovert. I'm really good at interacting with people. I'm really good at talking and blah, 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 blah. And it's easy for me. And like, it is, right? I enjoy talking. I enjoy having this conversation. And also it takes work, and it takes, anxiety in the lead up, and then afterwards I'm like, did I talk too much? Should I have said this? Did I sound too North American? Did I, like, you just like asking, as I live in Australia, and was I too much? Was I too busy? Did I say too much? Did I not ask enough questions? Did I not ask this friend about this thing? Blah, 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 blah. And so that is like, that was my job, was like social convener. And I behaved as though that didn't have a cost to me. And it does. Excuse me, it does. So when you kind of go, okay, like I'm going to go and do this social thing, and then when I get home, I have to lie down in a dark room for 20 minutes, and that's fine. Right? Or I'm going to go do this social thing, and after that, I need to like be under a weighted blanket. Like, so, we have all these things for our kids, like weighted blankets and sensory swings. And like, I am in that sensory swing more than anybody, right? Amazing. Like, it's so, oh my, you have to get one. It is the most, it's like being in the womb. Like, you're just like this cozy little bug. But like, I know now that like this thing that I do that I'm good at is a thing, but it also has a cost. And so it's like building in like, okay, let's try and have some quiet time and like not be beating ourselves up because we need quiet time. Like, it's only been, my kids are 6 and 11, and only in like the past month have I been like, I'm putting the TV on in the morning, and I'm going to let them watch TV so I can sleep in until 9 o'clock, because I have ADHD and I have delayed circadian rhythms. And getting up early is not like a moral victory, right? Like, so I am accepting this thing about myself and not going, if you were better, you would get up earlier. I'm going, I am wired to get up later and stay up later. And that is a morally neutral trait about me. So if my kids need to watch TV or play the GD Nintendo Switch that we just got for my son's birthday, and I'm like in a shame spiral about it, that's fine. You know, it doesn't mean I'm a bad person.
Yeah. Well, you're pretty much just describing my entire life. So awesome. And you know what?
We need to be friends. I want to give you a big hug.
Give you a hug too. You know, I will say too, like, I think this is also, and I want to be respectful of your time. I also think this is part of like, so the book that I'm writing is all around, it started from this concept of being touched out. And it was really a nervous system overwhelmed thing that I found myself in constantly. But this is what led me down this rabbit hole of ADHD, and also just realizing that when you have little kids, there's no such thing as quiet time. There's no such thing as a reprieve, right? And so all of these things that you've built into your life up until that point to give yourself that nervous system down regulation don't exist anymore, right? And so it's me thinking, oh, you know, again, there's something wrong with me as a parent, right? That I don't want my kid to touch me, or that I don't want my parent or my partner to touch me. But it's just so affirming when you start to understand, no, this is actually the way that you're wired, right?
Sensory overload. You're overloaded. You like, you know, I go to this Pilates class and the teacher has the loudest voice in Australia. And she says, this is going to sound mean, but like I do kind of a pretty good Australian accent. She's got like quite a broad one. And she goes, inhale, exhale, like that. And it's like, I'm like twitching. So I got some of those loop earplugs and I wear them to Pilates so my eardrums aren't assaulted and I can still go and do this thing that I enjoy, right? It's like the loud, the bright. My youngest child is very like moves around a lot.
Head explode, by the way.
Yeah.
She's scaring you.
And so it's like these things that your body needs are valid, and like do them. And the other thing I want to say is like the ways that you used to get a reprieve are now not only more difficult because you have a child, but they're also like more shameful because you shouldn't need a break from your kid. So, you know, before when it's like, oh my God, it's the weekend, I'm going to sleep until noon. It's like, oh, look at you, footloose and fancy free, whatever. And now it's like, you're the worst mother in the world. But it's like, you still need to sleep in sometimes. Like you still need to be alone sometimes. And I find personally like doing, you know, respecting those things about myself, like wearing the earplugs if I need to, or like having 1,000 fidget toys everywhere or whatever it is, means that, again, that fills my bowl of resilience a little bit. So I think it gives me a little bit more in the tank for when like something happens and I need to kind of respond appropriately. The other thing I do is internal family systems therapy, which like, I mean, I know you guys are a bit woo-woo. I'm not particularly woo-woo, right? And I say that with love.
Become woo-woo. It's fine.
Yeah. But like, I cannot believe how helpful IFS has been for me. I just, cause I've done in the past, I've done like, what's the one, CBT. And I used to try and do that before I knew I had ADHD. And it's like, just interrupt the thought, just interrupt it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're crazy.
CBT so much.
Yeah. It's not for you. It's not for you. And so then like I did like some depth. Are you guys the depth therapy with like the beeps or So I did that. No. What is your thing?
EMDR, is that what you're talking about?
So the beeps were like an EMDR thing. The woman that I went to before said we're going to do depth therapy. And we did this thing where I had headphones on and there was a beep in each ear, beep, beep, beep. And she said, you know, we came up with like a fundamental prompt. And she was like, what thoughts, feelings, images, or emotions are you noticing? This kind of thing. And you kind of went through this whole process that I was like, holy, right? And then I really wanted to talk about IFS. And so I went to another therapist after, finishing up with her. Cause I'm like, I not want to fix myself, but I'm like, I just feel like I want to feel as good as I can. But the IFS thing, holy dooly, like just understanding that there are like the responses that I have are like, parts of me that are finding this thing really difficult. And like, you can just talk to that part like it's my little 6-year-old kid and like validate that part. And then it kind of calms down a bit.
Yeah.
It has helped me so much. So, just doing that kind of work and doing it with an understanding of like what your brain is like is good, because like CBT just feels like another failure. Cause it's like, I mean, it's cute that you think I can interrupt the thought, but like, that's not happening.
I am legit speechless.
I'm seeing your face. I'm watching you make all these
There's so
connections.
many things that you are describing that I feel like Vanessa has spoken about struggling with or feeling flooded or overwhelmed. And I've kind of like, I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what to say.
But Danae, can I say this also? Like, so as I said, or I don't know if I said this, my mom is a retired school principal. Okay. So when you're a retired school principal and your 39-year-old daughter calls you on FaceTime from fucking Australia, that's what my dad calls it.
She's really upset about you being there, isn't she?
Aw, misses you.
And tells you that, her doctor has told her that she has ADHD. I think as a retired principal, my mom was like feeling badly about that, that maybe she missed it or she didn't notice. And I was like, I don't feel like you missed anything, that you didn't notice anything. Like, I didn't know, you didn't know. Now we know. So like, let's just go with this knowledge now. And like, I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad, Mom. I'm telling you this because it's like a truth about me. And like, I am happy that I know this. Like, would it have been helpful to know before? Probably. But I'm also very lucky in that I'm not like a lot of people with ADHD kind of go, imagine what I could have achieved, or imagine, there's like a grief. And I don't feel like that because I've done fine because of the circumstances that I grew up in. So I don't feel that same grief. But like, it wasn't going to be helpful for my mom to be like, oh, I can't believe I missed it and woe is me. It was just like, nobody missed it. Like, just don't miss it now.
Yeah. No, I mean, and listen, I feel like I'm just like having memories of like pistachios in grad school.
Oh my God, today I was sitting here thinking, oh my God, one of our good friends in grad school who we love very dearly, who passed away, that's the exact memory that just popped in my mind. I was like, oh my God, Darren, if only I could tell you. He was sitting behind me in one of our classes and we're like paying attention. And all of a sudden I was like looking around going, who the fuck is eating pistachios right now? And I turned around and he's like pistachio mid bite and he's cracking the fucking shells as we're in the middle of a class. And I almost lost my ever loving mind.
That is a personal attack, Vanessa. Do you feel the same way about like chewing noises? Honestly, like I will look at my husband like
I will
a crazy woman. And he's just like, I'm just eating. So you're like, what's happening in that class is like, you have too much attention and you hear everything, you see everything, you feel everything, your clothes, you feel every like tag and bra strap and like sometimes it's awful, but it's because you can't regulate what you need to pay attention to, which is the lecture, not the pistachios. But that's, like that kind of thing is just so, when you get it, it's like, oh, that makes sense. I'm not weird. I just have a very sensitive nervous system. And like, this guy is eating the loudest food in the world.
Oh, Darren.
And you're supposed to be the one with the problem.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I get that.
I love it. Well, I
Now I
feel
want to have you
like,
back again. So we can
yeah, I
talk
mean, I
all the
feel like I
things.
have a lot more questions, but first of all, I'll just go get ADHD 2.0 and read for myself and get some information. So thank you for the resources as well, Martha.
No problem. I'm very happy to come and talk to you two again. This has been very fun.
You can be with me on my journey.
Yeah.
Next
And I
time we'll bring
know.
my partner in and we'll make him sit here. We'll be like, okay, now we're going to talk about this.
Well, I have to say this about partners. Like, so my husband, David, is an angel in the universe, right? He's just the most lovely person in the whole wide world. And when we were, and my mom even was like, you would be dead if it wasn't for David. And I'm like, I know, like we would have no food. Like it would just, he does a lot of the executive functioning in our house, which is because we have an equitable relationship. And neither of us think that because I'm the woman, I should do those jobs, which is a serious part of this point. But I was like, when I first was figuring it out, I was like, do you wish like that you knew this before? Or like, do you feel ripped off? And he's like, you've always been like this. Like, I love you. Like it's not like this is a surprise. You've always had these kind of quirks, and I love that. And I love you. Right. So it's really important. Like if you do have a partner, that our partner really needs to also understand this. And, cause my husband, he'd go, but sometimes he'd be like, I feel like she's like forgetting this on purpose, or like she's, not doing it on purpose. And he would kind of take that as, insulting or whatever. And now he's like, oh, it's not that she's, not doing it on purpose. Like she's forgotten because of this reason, or she's hyper focused and it's hard for her to stop. Or like if I'm in the middle of something and he comes in and I'm like, what? And he's like, okay, that's not about me. Right. It's very difficult to switch tasks. And that's what's going on there. So yeah, getting them on board. And like for the listeners, if you're a person who has ADHD and you have a partner that makes you feel like shit about it, you got to kick them to the curb, because like that is like the ultimate self-care is to not be with a person who takes your like a neurological condition that you have and uses it against you. We don't do that. So yeah, I don't know. That was just my soapbox moment. Everybody should just read ADHD 2.0.
Done.
Wow. Well, Martha, we have a lightning round of questions that we ask all of our guests.
Oh my God.
So we have some questions for you.
No pressure. Don't worry.
Okay.
We have an editor, remember.
Yes, love that editor.
The first one is, who have been your greatest teachers, mentors, or people who have impacted your journey, either people you've known or their work has really impacted you?
Well, I mean, I've talked about those two books. Those two books have been really, really impactful for me. And then the sort of friend mentor that I told you about is just such an important person to me, and has kind of really helped me to realize that, like, it's okay to, like I said, learn something about yourself and then like try to make the absolute best of what you can with self-compassion. So just that friendship has been really useful for me too. But yeah, there's those two like really, science-based books about ADHD have helped me a lot and made me feel really validated. And that, yeah, I think has been the most helpful thing.
So the next question we always ask is around this concept of flow. And I'm even actually more curious now with the ADHD component, but what does that mean to you? What is flow? When do you find yourself in flow, right? When are you able to kind of attain that state?
It's really interesting because I was having a conversation yesterday on my podcast, the one that works for you. We were talking about... we were talking to a lawyer, and she's on the autism spectrum, and she was talking about getting in flow. And I was like, so do you know when you're in flow, or like, is it like afterwards you're like, oh, I was in flow? I know that I get in flow, when I'm writing, and also because I do a bit of like emceeing and public speaking and stuff. And it's like, I know when this is going really well. but it's something that I almost don't know until afterwards. And sorry, what was the question?
You answered it. I mean, it's like, when do you find it, right?
Okay,
Like,
great.
what is that for you? And so writing,
that writing,
speaking.
when I'm with friends and like having a really good time, I get in flow. And just, when I know, there's a bit of time here, I'm not going to be interrupted. I'm not stuck in wait mode because I have an appointment in 4 hours. Like, I can just get into this. That's how I do it.
Love it.
Well, and what breaks your heart?
You know what breaks my heart the most? I mean, well, a lot of things break my heart. I'm a very emotional person, but the thing that I really have a hard time with the most at the moment is like, when you're in like the shopping center and there's a little family and the child is really dysregulated and crying and upset, and the parent is probably dysregulated. And I'm like, oh my God, that kid just needs to go home and lie down. And this is not like a judgment thing, but I really notice in the world around me how much emotional dysregulation there is, and like how much we gaslight kids about their emotions. Like, I was in the shops the other day, and this mom, and again, this is like no shade on her, she's going through it obviously as well, but was like, her daughter was 4 or something and crying about something, and her mom was like, you're choosing to do this, you're choosing this. And I was just like, I was like about to start crying, because it's like that, it's, that little girl is struggling, you're the grown up. And I've just really, it hurts me when, I think that like those refrains, you're choosing this, or you're always doing this, like those become like our inner voice as adults. And I know I've probably said things to my kids that are not the best, and I know I've only just seen that woman for 2 minutes, but that like emotional dysregulation, when you can just see like this kid just needs something, and instead of trying to figure out what that is, we're just dismissing it. That makes me really sad.
Yeah, I feel that. Okay.
Sorry, that was a
final
bummer.
question. No, we asked the question for a reason. The final question is the not bummer question, which is, what is your favorite food? Oh, the dog wants to answer.
Sorry, I have 2 dogs. I don't care that much about food, to be honest. I like it. I hate cooking. But if I'm trying to feed myself, my favorite food is like what is available and easy. So I'm like, my favorite food is cereal.
I mean, that's I love cereal.
But I mean, I guess, I like things, but I just don't have any like, oh my God, I would die for this thing. Like, there are a lot of people that like live in a different country, and it's like, oh my God, what's the food that you miss for? And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm like, what am I eating? Is this ready? Great. I'll just eat it. But I guess I like sort of, I don't even know what I like. I just like things that are given to me and easy.
That is a whole category of answer in itself.
Yeah. Is that relatable?
To me it is. Not to me. Like that.
I am like, you are a person I do not understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
A big food person.
I'm a Taurus. I like all the sensations.
Well, I'm also a Taurus. I'm really sorry about my dogs, but
I love that.
What are we gonna do?
I know. Not a Korean trait to not like food, by the way. Interesting.
Yeah, it's not like I don't like it, but honestly, if I was like, I can just be satiated all the time, I'd be like, let's do that. Like, let's just do that thing, because that way I don't have to find something. Like, I will go, it's almost lunchtime, and I'm like, I guess I'm going to have peanut butter and banana again, because I'm a 5-year-old. Like, because like that's what's on the counter. And people are like, make some vegetables. And I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah, we could hang, Martha. You need to.
Oh God.
I like her.
Yeah. What's your thing, Danae? What's your easy food?
I'm very similar. I feel like someone has made it for me. I don't have like really, I love desserts more than I love food, to be honest. Like I'll have some chocolate and stuff like that, but not so much like, I don't like Vanessa with her mac and cheese. I'm like, yeah, I mean, mac and cheese is great. I don't like dream about it, but
like, I don't hate mac and cheese.
yeah. I mean,
I will open our pantry and I'll be like, we don't have anything. And David's like, we have lots of stuff. And I'm like, all of this is ingredients. Like, I just want food. Those are two different things. Yeah. So that's where I'm at. I'm sorry, Vanessa.
Yeah.
We can be soul sisters in other ways.
Yeah.
Listen, it works for me and Danae. We're very different in that way too. So.
Love it.
Well, all jokes aside, Martha, I just really want to thank you. I feel like you have given me a lot of insight into how to love someone that I love so much, maybe a little bit better than I have been. And I know that I'm not the only one who's going to like hear what you said in this episode and have that response. And I think that there's a lot of ways that we can really miss what someone is going through if we just don't understand. So thank you for bringing such really, really important information into my life and the lives of everyone listening.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad that it was helpful. And thank you very much for having me. Yes. And Vanessa, like, if you want to chat ADHD, just hit me up.
I'm sure you're like, I'm so sick of talking about it, but I will definitely hit you up.
No, I don't make that offer to everyone.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel better. How do we find you? Like if our listeners want to connect with you, whether it's around the advocacy component or the copywriting component as well, like, why don't you tell us where that can happen?
Yep. My website is wordcandy.com.au. I'm on Instagram at wordcandycoms, COMMS. And I'm on LinkedIn, which is just Martha Barnard-Rae. I'm also working on a book. So it is related to ADHD. So I've got a little like thing on my links page if people want to sign up for email updates, which will be few and far between, about that, but it is related to ADHD. So yeah, it's all there.
Love it.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Well, we will be having you back, so prepare. Thank you, Martha.
Love it.
Thanks, Martha.
You too.